Hi guys! Welcome in, welcome in. So, as some of you guys see, I am going to try my best in keeping a low tone because this is my first time trying to do like book reading ASMR. So it's going to be a lot more calm for this stream. Of course, I'm not going to be whispering because I want you to hear me as I read this book, but hopefully you guys enjoy this bit of a difference today. Thank you for the pets. Thank you for the pets, Jess. Hi, Mari. Welcome in. Hi, Goku. Hi, Leon. I had to turn away to cough real quick. God dang it, Leon. I'm trying to be all calm and collected right now. Thank you guys. I'm glad that you enjoy my book reading outfit. I also found this background to keep it all cozy as well. Of course, you hear some of the music in the back. I feel like it's a perfect setting for the kind of book that I am reading. So, I already told some of you I plan on reading The Last Apprentice from Joseph Delaney, and it's its first book ever called The Revenge of the Witch. If you guys end up really fascinated with the series, I highly recommend it. I highly recommend it. It's such a good book. Such a good book. It's like, I don't know what it is about dark fantasy, but this book really takes the cake for that, and I enjoy it very much. The title of the book and the author, I put it as the title of the stream. So again, if you guys end up really enjoying what is being read, I highly recommend taking a read for yourself. Sometimes imagining it in your head that everything that is being played out is something really cool. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started with our first chapter, talking about the seventh son. Also, excuse me if I mistake a lot or mess up a lot of sentences, because sometimes I wonder if I might be a little dyslexic. Alright, let's go ahead and get started. When the spook arrived, the light was already beginning to fail. Oh, I forgot something. I got something really cool. Boom! We got a magic book. A floaty book. I thought it pretty much fits the aesthetic very well, you know? Anyway, when the spook arrived, the light was already beginning to fail. It had been a long, hard day, and I was ready for my supper. "You sure he's a seventh son?" he asked. He was looking down at me and shaking his head doubtfully. Dad nodded. "And you were a seventh son, too." Dad nodded again and started stamping his feet impatiently, splattering my breeches with droplets of brown mud and manure. The rain was dripping from the peak of his cap. It had been raining for most of the month. There were new leaves on the trees, but the spring weather was a long time coming. My dad was a farmer, and his father had been a farmer, too. And the first rule of farming is to keep the farm together. You can't just divide it up among your children. It would get smaller and smaller with each generation until there was nothing left. So a father leaves his farm to his eldest son. Then he finds jobs for the rest. If possible, he tries to find each a trade. He needs lots of favors for that. The local blacksmith is one option, especially the farm is big and he's given the blacksmith plenty of work. Then it's odds on that the blacksmith will offer an apprenticeship, but that's still only one son sorted out. I was his seventh, and by the time it came to me, all the favors had been used up. Dad was so desperate that he was trying to get the spook to take me on as an apprentice. Or at least that's what I thought at the time. I should have guessed that Ma'am was behind it. She was behind of a lot of things. Long before I was born, it was her money that had brought our farm. How else could a seventh son have afforded it? And Ma'am wasn't county. She came from a land far across the sea. Most people couldn't tell, but sometimes if you listen very carefully, there was a slight difference in the way she pronounced certain words. Still, don't imagine that I was being sold into slavery or something. I was bored with farming anyway, and what they called the town was hardly more than a village in the back of beyond. It was certainly no place that I wanted to spend the rest of my life. So in one way, I quite liked the idea of being a spook. It was much more interesting than milking cows and spreading manure. It made me nervous though, because it was a scary job. I was going to learn how to protect farms and villages from things that go bump in the night. Dealing with ghouls, boogarts, and all manner of wicked beasties would be all in a day's work. Oh my god. That's what the spook did, and I was going to be his apprentice. How old is he? Asked the spook. He'll be 13 come August. Bit small for his age. Can he read and write? Aye, Dad answered. He could do both, and he also knows Greek. His ma'am taught him, and he could speak it almost before he could walk. The spook nodded and looked back across the muddy path beyond the gate toward the farmhouse, as if he were listening for something. Then he shrugged. It's a hard enough life for a man, never mind a boy, he said. Think he's up to it? He's strong, and he'll be as big as me when he's full grown, my dad said, straightening his back and drawing himself up to his full height. That done, the top of his head was just about level with the spook's chin. Suddenly the spook smiled. It was the very last thing I'd expected. His face was big, and it looked as if it had been chiseled from stone. Until then, I thought him a bit fierce. His long black cloak and hood made him look like a priest, but when looked at you directly, his grim expression made him appear more like a hangman weighing you up for the rope. The hair sticking out from under the front of his hood matched his beard, which was gray, but his eyebrows were black and very bushy. There was quite a bit of black sprouting... Here we go. There was quite a bit of black hair sprouting out of his nostrils, too. And his eyes were green, the same color as my own. Then I noticed something else about him. He was carrying a long staff. Of course, I'd seen that as soon as he came within sight, but I hadn't realized until that moment was that he was carrying it in his left hand. Did that mean that he was left-handed like me? It was something that had caused me no end of trouble at the village school. They'd even call in the local priest to look at me, and he kept shaking his head and telling me I'd have to fight it before it was too late. I didn't know what he meant. None of my brothers were left-handed, neither was my dad. My ma'am was cack-handed, though it never seemed to bother her much. So when the teacher threatened to beat it out of me and tied the pen to my right hand, she took me away from the school and from that day on taught me at home. How much to take him on? My dad asked, interrupting my thoughts. Now we were getting down to the real business. 2 guineas for a month's trial, if he's up to it. I'll be back again in the autumn and you'll owe me another 10. If not, you can have him back and it'll be just another guinea for my trouble. Dad nodded again and the deal was done. We went into the barn and the guineas were paid, but they didn't shake hands. Nobody wanted to touch a spook. My dad was a brave man just to stand within 6 feet of one. I've some business close by, said the spook, but I'll be back for the lad at first light. Make sure he's ready. I don't like to be kept waiting. When he'd gone, Dad tapped me on the shoulder. "It's a new life for you now, son," he told me. "Go and get yourself cleaned up. You're finished with farming." When I walked into the kitchen, my brother Jack had his arm around his wife, Ellie, and she was smiling up at him. I like Ellie a lot. She's warm and friendly in a way that makes you feel that she really cares about you. Mam says that marrying Ellie was good for Jack because she helped to make him a less agitated. Jack is the eldest and the biggest of us all, and as Dad sometimes jokes, the best looking of an ugly bunch. He is big and strong, all right, but despite his blue eyes and healthy red cheeks, his black bushy eyebrows almost meet in the middle. So I've never agreed with that. One thing I never argued with is that he managed to attract a kind and pretty wife. Ellie has hair the color of best quality straw 3 days after a good harvest, and skin that really glows in candlelight. "I'm leaving tomorrow morning," I blurted out. "The spook's coming for me at first light." Ellie's face lit up. "You mean he agreed to take you on?" I nodded. "He's given me a month's trial." "Oh, well, Tom, I'm really pleased for you," she said. "I don't believe it," scoffed Jack. "You, an apprentice to a spook? How can you do a job like that when you still can't sleep without a candle?" I laughed at his joke, but he had a point. I sometimes saw things in the dark, and a candle was the best way to keep them away so I could get some sleep. Jack came toward me, and with a roar got me in a headlock and began dragging me around the kitchen table. It was his idea of a joke. I put up just enough resistance to humor him, and after a few seconds he let go of me and patted me on the back. "Well done, Tom," he said. "You'll make a fortune doing that job. There's just one problem, though." "What's that?" I asked. "You'll need every penny you earn. Know why?" I shrugged. "Because the only friends you'll have are the ones you buy." I tried to smile, but there was a lot of truth in Jack's words. A spook worked and lived alone. "Oh, Jack, don't be cruel," Ellie scolded. "It was only a joke," Jack replied, as if he couldn't understand why Ellie was making so much fuss. But Ellie was looking at me rather than Jack, and I saw her face suddenly drop. "Oh, Tom," she said, "this means that you won't be here when the baby's born." She looked really disappointed, and it made me feel sad that I wouldn't be at home to see my new niece. Mam had said that Ellie's baby was going to be a girl, and she was never wrong about things like that. "I'll come back and visit just as soon as I can," I promised. Ellie tried to smile, and Jack came up and rested his arm across my shoulders. "You'll always have your family," he said. "We'll always be here if you need us." An hour later, I sat down to supper, knowing that I'd be gone in the morning. Dad said grace as he did every evening, and we all muttered amen, except Mam. She just stared down at her food, as usual, waiting politely until it was over. As the prayer ended, Mam gave me a little smile. It was a warm, special smile, and I don't think anyone else noticed. It made me feel better. The fire was still burning in the grate, filling the kitchen with warmth. At the center of our large wooden table was a brass candlestick, which had been polished until you could see your face in it. The candle was made of beeswax and was expensive, but Mam wouldn't allow tallow in the kitchen because of the smell. Dad made most of the decisions on the farm, but in some things she's always got her own way. As we tucked into our big plates of steaming hot pot, it struck me how old Dad looked tonight. Old and tired. And there was an expression that flickered across his face from time to time, a hint of sadness. But he brightened up a bit when he and Jack started discussing the price of pork and whether or not it was the right time to send for the pig butcher. "Better to wait another month or so," Dad said. The price is sure to go higher. Jack shook his head and they began to argue. It was a friendly argument, the kind families often have, and I could tell that Dad was enjoying it. I didn't join in, though. All that was over for me. As Dad had told me, I was finished with farming. Mam and Ellie were chuckling together softly. I tried to catch what they were saying, but by now Jack was in full flow, his voice getting louder and louder. When Mam glanced across at him, I could tell she had enough of his noise. Oblivious to Mam's glances and continuing to argue loudly, Jack reached across for the salt cellar and accidentally knocked it over, spilling a small cone of salt on the tabletop. Straight away he took a pinch and threw it back over his left shoulder. It is an old county superstition, but doing that, you were supposed to ward off the bad luck you've earned by spilling it. Jack, you don't need any salt on that anyway, Mam scolded. It spoils a good hot pot and it is an insult to the cook. Sorry, Mam, Jack apologized. You're right. It's perfect just as it is. She gave him a smile, then nodded toward me. Anyway, nobody's taking any notice of Tom. That's no way to treat him on his last night at home. I'm all right, Mam, I told her. I'm happy to just sit here and listen. Mam nodded. Well, I've got a few things to say to you. After supper, stay down in the kitchen and we'll have a little talk. So after Jack, Ellie, and Dad had gone to bed, I sat in a chair by the fire and waited patiently to hear what Mam had to say. Mam wasn't a woman who made a lot of fuss. At first she didn't say much, apart from explaining what she was wrapping up for me. A spare pair of trousers, 3 shirts, and 2 pair of good socks that had only been darned once each. I stared into the embers of the fire, tapping my feet on the flags, while Mam drew up her rocking chair and positioned it so that she was facing directly toward me. Her black hair was streaked with a few strands of gray, but that apart from that she looked much of the same as she had when I was just a toddler, hardly up to her knees. Her eyes were still bright, and but for her pale skin, she looked a picture of health. This is the last time we'll get to talk together for a long while, she said. It's a big step leaving home and starting out on your own. So if there's anything you need to say, anything you need to ask, now's the time to do it. I couldn't think of a single question. In fact, I couldn't even think. Hearing her say all that had started tears pricking behind my eyes. The silence went on for quite a while. All that could be heard was my feet tapping on the flags. Finally, Mam gave a little sigh. What's wrong? She asked. Has the cat got your tongue? I shrugged. Stop fidgeting, Tom, and concentrate on what I'm saying, Mam warned. First of all, are you looking forward to tomorrow and starting your new job? I'm not sure, Mam, I told her, remembering Jack's joke about having to buy friends. Nobody wants to go anywhere near a spook. I'll have no friends. I'll be lonely all the time. It won't be as bad as you think, Mam said. You'll have your master to talk to. He'll be your teacher, and no doubt he'll eventually become your friend. And you'll be busy all the time, busy learning new things. You'll have no time to feel lonely. Don't you find the whole thing new and exciting? It's exciting, but the job scares me. I want to do it, but I don't know if I can. One part of me wants to travel and see places, but it'll be hard not to live here anymore. I'll miss you all. I'll miss being at home. You can't stay here, Mam said. Your dad's getting too old to work, and come next winter, he's handing the farm over to Jack. Ellie will be having her baby soon, no doubt the first of many. Eventually, there won't be room for you here. No, you better get used to it before that happens. You can't come home. Her voice seems cold and a little sharp, and to hear her speak to me like that drove a pain deep into my chest and throat so that I could hardly breathe. I just wanted to go to bed then, but she had a lot to say. I'd rarely heard her use so many words all in one go. "You have a job to do, and you're going to do it," she said sternly. "And not only do it, you're going to do it well. I married your dad because he was the seventh son, and I bore him 6 sons so that I could have you. 7 times 7, you are, and you have the gift. Your new master's still strong, but he's some ways past his best, and his time is finally coming to an end. For nearly 60 years, he's walked the county lines doing his duty, doing what has to be done. Soon it'll be your turn, and if you won't do it, then who will? Who will look after the ordinary folk? Who will keep them from harm? Who will make the farms, villages, and towns safe so that women and children can walk the streets and lanes free from fear?" I didn't know what to say. I couldn't look her in the eye. I just fought to hold back the tears. "I love everyone in this house," she said, her voice softening. "But in the whole wide county, you're the only person who's really like me. As yet, you're just a boy who's still got a lot of growing up to do. But you're the 7th son of a 7th son. You've the gift and the strength to do what has to be done. I know you're going to make me proud of you." "Well now," Ma'am said, coming to her feet. "I'm glad that we've got that sorted out. Now off to bed with you. It's a big day tomorrow and you want to be at your best." She gave me a hug and a warm smile, and I tried really hard to be cheerful and smiled back. But once up in my bedroom, I sat on the edge of my bed just staring vacantly and thinking about what Ma'am had told me. My ma'am is well respected in the neighborhood. She knows more about plants and medicines than the local doctor, and when there is a problem with delivering a baby, the midwife always sends for her. Ma'am is an expert on what she calls breech births. Sometimes a baby tries to get born feet first, but my mother is good at turning them while they are still in the womb. Dozens of women in the county owe their lives to her. Anyway, that's what my dad always said, but Ma'am was modest and she never mentioned things like that. She just got on with what had to be done. I knew that's what she expected of me, so I wanted to make her proud. But could she really mean that she'd only marry my dad and had my 6 brothers so she could give birth to me? It didn't seem possible. After thinking things through, I went across to the window and sat in the old wicker chair for a few minutes, staring through the window, which faced north. The moon was shining, bathing everything in its silver light. I could see across the farmyard, beyond the 2 hayfields in the north pasture, right in the boundary of our farm, which ended halfway in the Hangman's Hill. I liked the view. I liked the Hangman's Hill from a distance. I liked the way it was the farthest thing you could see. For years, this had been my routine before climbing into bed each night. I used to stare at the hill and imagine what was on the other side. I knew that it was really just more fields, and then, 2 miles farther on, what passed for the local village, 6 houses, a small church, and an even smaller school. But my imagination conjured up other things. Sometimes I imagined high cliffs with an ocean beyond, or maybe a forest or a great city with tall towers and twinkling lights. But now, I gazed at the hill. I remembered my fear as well. Yes, it was fine from a distance, but it wasn't a place I'd ever wanted to get close to. Hangman's Hill, as you might have guessed, didn't get its name for nothing. 3 generations earlier, a war had raged over the whole land, and the men of the county had played their part. It had been the worst of all wars, a bitter civil war where families had been divided and where sometimes brothers had even fought brother. In the last winter of the war, There'd been a big battle a mile or so to the north, just on the outskirts of the village. When it was finally over, the winning army had brought their prisoners to this hill and hanged them from the trees on its northern slope. They hanged some of their own men too, for what they claimed was cowardice in the face of the enemy. But there was another version of that tale. It was said that some of these men had refused to fight people they considered to be neighbors. Even Jack never liked working close to that boundary fence, and the dogs wouldn't go more than a few feet into the wood. As for me, because I can sense things that others can't, I couldn't even work in the north pasture. You see, from there I could hear them. I could hear the ropes creaking and the branches groaning under their weight. I could hear the dead strangling and choking on the other side of the hill. Ma'am had said that we were like each other. Well, she was certainly like me in one way. I knew she could also see things that others couldn't. One winter when I was very young and all my brothers lived at home, the noises from the hill got so bad at night that I could even hear them from my bedroom. My brothers didn't hear a thing, but I did, and I couldn't sleep. Ma'am came to my room every time I called, even though she had to be up at the crack of dawn to do her chores. Finally, she said she was going to sort it out, and one night she climbed Hangman's Hill alone and went into the trees. When she came back, everything was quiet, and it stayed like that for months afterward. So there was one way in which we weren't alike. Ma'am was a lot braver than I was. And that is the end of chapter 1 of The Seventh Son. Alright guys, I'm going to take a little sippy. I don't know if anybody would like to take a break to get a drink or a snack. But I need to clear my throat a little bit, so just give me one moment. I'm gonna mute a little bit so I can cough real quick. Oh, thank you for the follow, Cams. Thank you for the follow. Welcome in, welcome in. I hope you enjoy your time with us. My name's Mimi. I'm usually a gamer streamer, but I'm trying my first hand with book reading ASMRs. So I hope you enjoy your time here, and I hope you enjoy the story. Let me mute real quick so I can cough and I don't blast anyone's ears. I got my throat cleared up a little bit better. Be here, just need a place to unwind and relax. Well, you're more than welcome to be here, Cams. You picked a good stream to attend today. I think I might make Mondays my book reading ASMR, so I hope you're able to relax and enjoy yourself with a story. Alright guys, I'm gonna go ahead and continue to chapter 2. On the road. I was up in an hour before dawn, but Ma'am was already in the kitchen, cooking my favorite breakfast, bacon and eggs. Dad came downstairs while I was mopping the plate with my last slice of bread. As we said goodbye, he pulled something from his pocket and placed it in my hands. It was the small tinderbox that had belonged to his own dad and to his granddad before that. One of his favorite possessions, "I want you to have this, son," he said. "It might come in useful in your new job. And come back and see us soon. Just because you left home, it doesn't mean that you can't come back and visit." "It's time to go, son," Ma'am said, walking across to give me a final hug. "He's at the gate. Don't keep him waiting." We were a family that didn't like too much fuss, and as we said our goodbyes, I walked out into the yard alone. The spook was on the other side of the gate, a dark silhouette against the gray dawn light. His hood was up and he was standing straight and tall, his staff in his left hand. I walked toward him, carrying my small bundle of possessions, feeling very nervous. To my surprise, the spook opened the gate and came into the yard. "Well, lad," he said, "follow me. We might as well start the way we mean to go on." Instead of heading for the road, he led the way north, directly toward Hangman's Hill, and soon we were crossing the north pasture. My heart already started to thump. When we reached the boundary fence, the spook climbed over with the ease of a man half his age, but I froze. As I rested my hands against the top edge of the fence, I could already hear the sounds of the trees creaking, their branches bent and bowed under the weight of the hanging men. "What's the matter, lad?" asked the spook, turning to look back at me. "If you're frightened of something on your own doorstep, you'll be a little use to me." I took a deep breath and I clambered over the fence. We trudged upward, the dawn light darkening as we moved up into the gloom of the trees. Oh. "Thank you for the follow, Ranch. Thank you for the follow. Welcome in, welcome in. I hope you enjoy your time here, and I hope you enjoy this story." The higher we climbed, the colder it seemed to get, and soon I was shivering. It was the kind of cold that gives you goose pimples and makes the hair on the back of your neck start to rise. It was a warning that something wasn't quite right. I'd felt it before when something had come close to that didn't belong in this world. Once we reached the summit of the hill, I could see them below me. There had to be 100 at least, sometimes 2 or 3, hanging from the same tree, wearing soldiers' uniforms with the broad leather belts and big boots. Their hands were tied behind their backs, and all of them behaved differently. Some struggled desperately so that the branch above them bounced and jerked, while others were just spinning slowly on the end of the rope, pointing first one way, then the other. As I watched, I suddenly felt a strong wind on my face, a wind so cold and fierce that it could have been natural. The trees bowed low, and their leaves shriveled and began to fall. Within moments, all the branches were bare. When the wind had eased, the spook put his hands on my shoulder and guided me nearer to the hanging men. We stopped just feet away from the nearest. "Look at him," said the spook. "What do you see?" "A dead soldier," I replied, my voice beginning to wobble. "How old does he look?" 17 at most." "Good. Well done, lad. Now tell me, do you still feel scared?" "A bit. I don't like being so close to him." "Why?" "There's nothing to be afraid of. Nothing that can hurt you. Think about what it must have been like for him. Concentrate on him rather than yourself. How must he have felt? What would be the worst thing?" I tried to put myself in the soldier's place and imagine how it must have been to die like that. The pain and the struggle for the breath would have been terrible, but there might have been something even worse. He'd have known he was dying, and that he'd never be able to go home again, that he'd never see his family again, I told the spook. With those words, a wave of sadness washed over me. Then, even as that happened, the hanging men slowly began to disappear, until we were alone on the hillside and the leaves were back on the trees. "How do you feel now? Still afraid?" I shook my head. No, I said. I just feel sad. Well done, lad. You're learning. We're the seventh sons of the seventh sons, and we have the gift of seeing things that our others can't. But that gift can sometimes be a curse. If we're afraid, sometimes there are things that can feed on that fear. Fear makes it worse for us. The trick is to concentrate on what you can see and stop thinking about yourself. It works every time. Oh, thank you for the follow, Alex. Thank you for the follow. Welcome in. Welcome in. Hope you enjoy your time here, and I hope you enjoy the story. I gotta try and find my place again. Okay, it works every time. It was a terrible sight, lad. But they're just ghasts, continued the spook. There's nothing much we can do about them, and they'll just fade away in their own time. In 100 years or so, there will be nothing left. I felt like telling him that Ma'am did something about them once, but I didn't. To contradict him would have gotten us off at a bad start. Now, if they were ghosts, that would be different, said the spook. You could talk to ghosts and tell them what's what. Just making them realize that they're dead is a great kindness and an important step in getting them to move on. Usually a ghost is a bewildered spirit trapped on this earth but not knowing what's happened. So often they're in torment. Then again, others are here with a definite purpose, and they might have things to tell you. But a ghast is just a fragment of a soul that's gone on to better things. That's what these are, lad. Just ghasts. You saw the trees change. The leaves fell and it was winter. Well, the leaves are back now, so we're just looking at something from the past. Just a reminder of evil things that sometimes happen on this earth. Usually if you're brave, they can't see you and they don't feel anything. A ghast is just a reflection in a pond that stays behind when its owner has moved on. Understand what I'm saying? I nodded. Right. So that's one thing sorted out. We'll be dealing with the dead from time to time, so you might as well get used to them. Anyway, let's get started. We've quite a way to go. Here from now on, you'll be carrying this. The spook handed me a big leather bag and without a backward glance, headed back up the hill. I followed him over its crest, then down through the trees toward the road, which was a distant gray scar meandering its way south through the green and brown patchwork of fields. Done much traveling, lad, the spook called back over his shoulder. Seen much of the county? I told him I've never been more than 6 miles from my dad's farm. Going to the local market was the most traveling I've ever done. The spook muttered something under his breath and shook his head. I could tell he wasn't best pleased by my answer. Well, your travels start today, he said. We're heading south toward a village called Harshaw. It's just over 15 miles as the crows flies, and we have to be there before dark. I'd heard of Harshaw. It was a pit village and had the largest coal yards in the county, holding the output for dozens of surrounding mines. I've never expected to go there, and I wondered what the spook's business could be in a place like that. Welcome in, Cal. Welcome in. He walked at a furious pace, taking big, effortless strides. Soon I was struggling to keep up, as well as carrying my own small bundle of clothes and other belongings. I now had his bag, which seemed to be getting heavier by the minute. Then, just to make things worse, it started to rain. About an hour before noon, the spook came to a sudden halt. He turned around and stared hard at me. By then, I was about 10 paces behind. My feet were hurting, and I'd already developed a slight limp. The road was little more than a track that was quickly turning to mud. Just as I caught up with him, I stubbed my toe, slipped, and almost lost my balance. He tutted. "Feeling dizzy, lad?" he asked. I shook my head. I wanted to give my arm a rest, but it didn't seem right to put his bag down in the mud. "That's good," said the spook with a faint smile, the rain dripping from the edge of his hood down onto his beard. "Never trust a man who's dizzy. There's something well worth remembering." "I'm not dizzy," I protested. "No?" asked the spook, raising his bushy eyebrows. "Then it must be your boots. They won't be much of use in this job. My boots were the same as my dad's, and Jack's, sturdy enough and suitable for the mud and muck of the farmyard, but the kind that needed a lot of getting used to. A new pair usually cost you a fortnight's blisters before your feet got bedded in." I looked down at the spooks. They were made of strong, good quality leather, and they had extra thick soles. They must have cost a fortune, but I suppose that for someone who did a lot of walking, they were worth every penny. They flexed as he walked, and I just knew that they'd be more comfortable from the very moment he pulled them on. "Good boots are important in this job," said the spook. "We depend on neither man nor beast to get us where we need to go. If you rely on your own 2 good legs, then they won't let you down. So if I finally decide to take you on, I'll get you a pair of boots just like mine. Until then, you'll just have to manage as best as you can." At noon, we halted for a short break, sheltering from the rain in an abandoned cattle shed. The spook took a piece of cloth out of his pocket and unwrapped it, revealing a large lump of yellow cheese. He broke off a bit and handed it to me. I'd seen worse, and I was hungry, so I wolfed it down. The spook only ate a small piece himself before wrapping the rest again and stuffing it back into his pocket. Once out of the rain, he pulled his hood back, so I now had the chance to look at him properly for the first time. Apart from the full beard and the hangman's eyes, his most noticeable feature was his nose, which was a grim and sharp with a curve to it that suggested a bird's beak. The mouth, when closed, was almost hidden by that mustache and beard. The beard itself had looked gray at first glance, but when I looked closer, trying to be as casual as possible so that he wouldn't notice, I saw the most of the colors of the rainbow. Excuse me, guys, I need to cough again real quick. Alright. There were shades of red, black, brown, and obviously lots of gray. But as I came to realize later, it all depended on the light. Weak jaw, weak character, my dad always used to say, and he also believed that some men wore beards just to hide that fact. Looking at the spook, though, you could see despite the beard that his jaw was long, and when he opened his mouth he revealed yellow teeth that were very sharp and more suited to gnawing on red meat than nibbling at cheese. With a shiver, I suddenly realized that he reminded me of a wolf. And it wasn't just the way he looked. He was a kind of predator because he hunted the dark. Living merely on nibbles of cheese would make him always hungry and mean. If I completed my apprenticeship, I'd end up just like him. "You still hungry, lad?" he asked, his green eyes boring hard into my own until I started to feel a bit dizzy. I was soaked to the skin and my feet were hurting, but most of all, I was hungry. So I nodded, thinking he might offer me some more. But he just shook his head and muttered something to himself. Then once again he looked at me sharply. "Hunger's something you're going to have to get used to," he said. "We don't eat much when we're working, and if the job's very difficult, we don't eat anything at all until afterward. Fasting's the safest thing because it makes us less vulnerable to the dark. It makes us stronger. So you might as well start practicing now, because when we get to Horshaw, I'm going to give you a little test. You're going to spend a night in a haunted house, and you're going to do it alone. That'll show me what you're really made of." And that completes chapter 2. Alright guys, I'm going to get another sip of my soda. And again, if you would like to take a quick second break to go to the bathroom, get a drink, get a snack, go ahead. But I need to clear my throat. Alright. We're going to go ahead and continue to chapter 3. Number 13, Watery Lane. We reached Horshaw as a church bell began to chime in the distance. It was 7 o'clock and starting to get dark. A heavy drizzle blew straight into our faces, but there was still enough light for me to judge that this wasn't a place I ever wanted to live in, and that even in a short visit would be best avoided. Horshaw was a black smear against the green fields, a grim, ugly little place with about 24 rows of mean back-to-back houses huddling together mainly on the southern slope of a damp, bleak hillside. The whole area was riddled with mines, and the Horshaw was at its center. High above the village was a large slag heap which marked the entrance to a mine. Behind the slag heap were the coal yards which stored enough fuel to keep the biggest towns in the county warm through even the longest of winters. Soon we were walking down through the narrow cobbled streets, keeping pressed close to the grimy walls to make way for carts heaped with black lumps of coal, wet and gleaming with the rain. The huge Shire horses that pulled them were straining against their loads, hooves slipping on the shiny cobbles. There were few people about, but lace curtains twitched as we passed, and once we meet a group of dour-faced miners who were trudging up the hill to begin their night shift. They'd been talking in loud voices but suddenly fell silent and moved into a single column to pass us, keeping to the far side of the street. One of them actually made the sign of the cross. "Get used to it, lad," growled the spook. "We're needed but rarely welcomed, and some places are worse than others." Finally, we turned a corner into the lowest, meanest street of all. Nobody lived there, you could tell that right away. For one thing, some of the windows were broken and others were boarded up. And although it was almost dark, no lights were showing. At one end of the street was an abandoned corn merchant's warehouse, 2 huge wooden doors gaping open and hanging from their rusty hedges. The spook halted outside the very last house. It was the one on the corner closest to the warehouse, the only house in the street to have a number. The number was crafted out of the metal and nailed to the door. It was 13, the worst and unluckiest of all numbers, and directly above, there was a street sign high on the hill hanging from a single rusty rivet and pointing almost vertically towards the cobbles. It said, "Watery Lane." This house did have window panes, but the lace curtains were yellow and hung with cobwebs. This must be the haunted house my master had warned me about. The spook pulled a key from his pocket, unlocked the door, and led the way into the darkness within. At first, I was just glad to be out of the drizzle. But when he lit a candle and positioned it on the floor near the middle of the small front room, I knew that I'd be more comfortable in an abandoned cowshed. There wasn't a single item of furniture to be seen, just a bare, flagged floor and a heap of dirty straw underneath the window. The room was damp, too, the air very dank and cold, and by the light of the flickering candle, I could see my breath steaming. What I saw was bad enough, but what he said was even worse. Well, lad, I've got business to attend to, so I'll be off. But I'll be back later. Know what you have to do? No, sir, I replied, watching the flickering candle, worried that it might go out at any second. Well, it's what I told you earlier. Weren't you listening? You need to be alert, not dreaming. Anyway, it's nothing very difficult, he explained, scratching at his beard as if there was something crawling about in it. You just had to spend the night here alone. Sorry guys, I have a really bad cough affecting my throat right now. Crawling about in it. You just had to spend the night here alone. I'll bring all my new apprentices to this old house on their first night so I can find out what they're made of. Oh, but there's one thing I haven't told you. At midnight, I'll expect you to go down into the cellar and face whatever it is that's lurking down there. Cope with that, and you're well on your way to being taken on permanently. Any questions? I had questions, all right, but I was too scared to hear the answers. So I just shook my head and I tried to keep my top lip from trembling. How will you know when it's midnight? He asked. I shrugged. I was pretty good at guessing the time from the position of the sun or the stars, and if I ever woke in the middle of the night, I almost always knew exactly what time it was. But here I wasn't so sure. In some places, time seems to move more slowly, and I had a feeling that this old house would be one of them. Suddenly, I remembered the church clock. It's just gone 7, I said. I'll listen for 12 chimes. Well, at least you're awake now, the spook said with a little smile. When the clock strikes 12, take the stub of the candle and use it to find your way down to the cellar. Until then, sleep if you can manage it. Now listen carefully. There are 3 important things to remember. Don't open the front door to anyone, no matter how hard they knock. Yeesh, I don't know why I'm coughing so much. Alright, I'm going to reread that. Now listen carefully. There are 3 important things to remember. Don't open the front door to anyone, no matter how hard they knock. And don't be late going down to the cellar. He took a step toward the front door. What's the 3rd thing? I called out at the very last moment. The candle, lad. Whatever else you do, don't let it go out. Oof, I don't know why I'm coughing so much. Then he was gone, closing the door behind him, and I was all alone. Cautiously, I picked up the candle and walked to the kitchen door and peered inside. It was empty of everything but a stone stink. The back door was closed, but the wind still wailed beneath it. There were 2 doors on the right. One was open, and I could see the bare wooden stairs that led to the bedrooms above. The other one, that's closest to me, was closed. Something about that closed door made me uneasy, but I decided to take a quick look. Nervously, I gripped the handle and I tugged at the door. It was hard to shift, and for a moment I had a creepy feeling that somebody was holding it closed on the other side. When I tugged even harder, it opened with a jerk, making me lose my balance. I staggered back a couple steps and I almost dropped the candle. Stone steps led down into the darkness. They were black with coal dust. They curved away to the left so I could see right down into the cellar. But a cold draft came up them, making the candle flame dance and flicker. I closed the door quickly and went back into the front room, closing the kitchen door too. I put the candle down carefully in the corner farthest away from the door and window. Once I was satisfied that it wouldn't fall over, I looked for a place on the floor where I could sleep. There wasn't much choice. I certainly wasn't sleeping on the damp straw, so I settled down in the center of the room. The flags were hard and cold, but I closed my eyes. Once asleep, I'd be away from that grim old house, and I felt pretty confident that I'd wake up just before midnight. Usually I get to sleep easily, but this was different. I kept shivering with cold, and the wind was beginning to rattle the window's panes. There were also rustlings and patterings coming from the walls. Just mice, I kept telling myself. We were certainly used to them on the farm, but then suddenly there came a disturbing new sound from down below in the depths of the dark cellar. At first it was faint, making me strain my ears, but gradually it grew until I was in no doubt about what I could hear. Down in the cellar, something was happening that shouldn't be happening. Someone was digging rhythmically, turning heavy earth with a sharp metal spade. First came the grind of a metal edge striking a stony surface, followed by a soft, squelching, sucking sound as the spade pushed deep into the heavy clay and tore it free from the earth. This went on for several minutes until the noise stopped as suddenly as it began. All was quiet. Even the mice stopped their pattering. It was as if the house and everything in it were holding their breath. I know I was. The silence ended with a resounding thump, then a whole series of thumps, definite in rhythm. Thumps that were getting louder and louder and closer. Someone was climbing the stairs from the cellar. I snatched up the candle and shrank it to the farthest corner. Thump, thump. Nearer and nearer came the sound of heavy boots. Who could have been digging down there in this darkness? Who could have been climbing the stairs now? But maybe it wasn't a question of who was climbing the stairs, but it was a question of what. I heard the cellar door open and the thump of boots in the kitchen. I pressed myself back into the corner, trying to make myself small, waiting for the kitchen door to open. And open it did. Very slowly, with a loud creak, something stepped into the room. I felt a coldness then. Real coldness. The kind of coldness that has told me something was close that didn't belong on this earth. It was like the coldness of Hangman's Hill, only far, far worse. I lifted the candle, its flame flickering eerie shadows that danced up the walls and onto the ceilings. "Who's there?" I asked. "Who's there?" My voice trembled even more than the hand holding the candle. There was no answer. Even the wind outside had fallen silent. "Who's there?" I called out again. Again, no reply. But invisible boots grated on the flags as they stepped toward me. Nearer and nearer they came, and now I could hear breathing. Something big was breathing heavily. It sounded like a huge cart horse that had just pulled a heavy load up a steep hill. At the very last moment, the footsteps veered away from me and halted close to the window. I was holding my breath, and the thing by the window seemed to be breathing for both of us. drawing great gulps of air into its lungs as if it could never get enough. Just when I could stand it no longer, it gave a huge sigh that sounded weary and sad at the same time, and the invisible boots grated on the flags once more. Heavy steps that moved away from the window, back toward the door. When they began to thump their way down the cellar steps, I was finally able to breathe again. My heart began to slow. My hands stopped shaking, and gradually I calmed down. I had to pull myself together. I've been scared, but if that was the worst that was going to happen tonight, I'd gotten through it, passed my first test. I was going to be the spook's apprentice, so I had to get used to places like this haunted house. It went with the job. After about 5 minutes or so, I began to feel better. I even thought about making another attempt to get to sleep, but as my dad sometimes says, there's no rest for the wicked. Well, I don't know what I'd done wrong, but there was a sudden new sound to disturb me. It was faint and distant at first. Something knocking on a door. There was a pause, and then it happened again. 3 distinct raps, but a little nearer this time. Another pause and 3 more raps. It didn't take me long to work it out. Something was rapping hard on each door in the street, moving nearer and nearer to number 13. When it finally came to the haunted house, the 3 raps on the front door were loud enough to wake the dead. Would the thing in the cellar climb the steps to answer that summons? I felt trapped between the two. Something outside wanted to get in, something below that wanted to be free. And then suddenly, it was all right. A voice called to me from the other side of the front door. A voice I recognized. Tom! Tom! Open the door! Let me in! It was Ma'am. I was so glad to hear her that I rushed to the front door without thinking. It was raining outside, and she'd be getting wet. Quickly, Tom, quickly, Ma'am called. Don't keep me waiting. I was actually lifting the latch to open it when I remembered the spook's warning. Don't open the front door to anyone, no matter how hard they knock. But how could I leave Ma'am out there in the dark? Come on, Tom, let me in, the voice called again. Remembering what the spook had said, I took a deep breath and I tried to think. Common sense told me it couldn't be her. Why would she have followed me all this way? How would she have known where we were going? Ma'am wouldn't have traveled alone either. My dad or Jack would have come with her. No, it was something else waiting outside. Something without hands that could still rap on the door. Something without feet that could still stand on the pavement. The knocking started to get louder. Please let me in, Tom, pleaded the voice. How can you be so hard and cruel? I'm cold, wet, and tired. Eventually it began to cry, and then I knew for certain that it couldn't possibly be Ma'am. Ma'am was strong. Ma'am never cried, no matter how bad things got. After a few moments, the sounds faded and stopped altogether. I lay down on the floor and I tried to sleep again. I kept turning over, first one way and then the other. But try as I might, I couldn't get to sleep. The wind began to rattle the window panes even louder, and on every hour and half hour, the church clock chimed, moving me closer to midnight. The nearer the time came for me to go down to the cellar steps, the more nervous I became. I did want to pass the spook's test, but oh, how long to be back home in my nice, safe, warm bed. And then just after the clock had given a single chime, 11:30, the digging began again. Once more I heard the slow thump, thump of heavy boots coming up the steps from the cellar. Once more the door opened and the invisible boots stepped into the front room. By now the only bit of me that was moving was my heart, which pounded so hard it seemed about to break my ribs. But this time, the boots didn't even veer away in the direction of the window. They kept coming. Thump, 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 coming straight toward me. I felt myself being lifted roughly by the hair and skin at the nape of my neck, just like a mother cat carries her kittens. Then an invisible arm wrapped itself around my body, pinning my arms to my sides. I tried to suck in a breath, but it was impossible. My chest was being crushed. I was being carried toward the cellar door. I couldn't see what was carrying me, but I could hear its wheezing breath, and I struggled in a panic, because somehow I knew exactly what was going to happen. Somehow I knew why there'd been the sound of digging from below. I was going to be carried down to the cellars into the darkness, and I knew that a grave was waiting for me down there. I was going to be buried alive. I was terrified, and I tried to cry out, but it was worse than just being held in a tight grip. I was paralyzed. I couldn't move a muscle. Suddenly, I was falling. I found myself on all fours, staring at the open door to the cellar, just inches from the top step. In a panic, my heart thumping too fast to count the beats, I lurched to my feet and I slammed the cellar door shut. Still trembling, I went back into the front room to find that one of the spook's 3 rules had been broken. The candle had gone out. As I walked toward the window, a sudden flash of light illuminated the room, followed by a loud crash of thunder almost directly overhead. Rain squalled against the house, rattling the windows and making the front door creak and groan as if something were trying to get in. I stared out miserably for a few minutes, watching the flashes of lightning. It was a bad night, but even though lightning scared me, I would have given anything to be out of there walking the streets, anything to avoid it going down into the cellar. In the distance, the church clock began to chime. I counted the chimes, and there were exactly 12. Now I had to face what was in the cellar. It was then, as lightning lit the room again, that I noticed a large footprints on the floor. At first I thought they'd been made by the spook, but they were black, as if the huge boots that made them had been covered with coal dust. They came from a direction of the kitchen door, went almost to the window, and then turned and went back the way they'd come, back to the cellar, down into the dark where I had to go. Forcing myself forward, I searched for the floor with my hands for the stub of the candle. Then I scrambled around for my small bundle of clothes. Wrapped in the center of it was the tinderbox that my dad had given me. Fumbling in the dark, I shook the small pile of tinder out onto the floor and used the stone and metal to strike up sparks. I kindled that little pile of wood until it burst into flame, just long enough to light the candle. Little had Dad known that his gift would prove so useful so soon. As I opened the cellar door, there was another flash of lightning and a sudden crash of thunder that shook the whole house and rumbled down the steps ahead of me. I descended into the cellar, my hand trembling and the candle stub dancing till strange shadows flickered against the wall. I didn't want to go down there, but if I failed the spook's test, I'd probably be on my way back home as soon as it came light. I imagined my shame at having to tell Ma'am what had happened. 8 steps, and I was turning the corner so that the cellar was in view. It wasn't a big cellar, but it had dark shadows in the corners that the candlelight couldn't quite reach, and there were spider webs hanging from the ceiling in frail, mucky curtains. Small pieces of coal and large wooden crates were scattered across the earthen floor, and there was an old wooden table next to the big beer barrel. I stepped around the beer barrel and noticed something in the far corner. Something just behind some crates that scared me so much I almost dropped the candle. It was a dark shape, almost like a bundle of rags, and it was making a noise. A faint rhythmical sound, like breathing. I took a step towards the rags, then another, using all my willpower to make my legs move. It was then as I got so close that I could have touched it that the thing suddenly grew. From a shadow on the floor, it reared up before me until it was 3 or 4 times bigger. I almost ran. It was tall, dark, hooded, and terrifying with green glittering eyes. Only then did I notice the staff that it was holding in its left hand. "What kept you?" demanded the spook. "You're nearly 5 minutes late." And that brings us to the end of chapter 3. Alright guys, this is another time to take a break. Again, bathrooms, drinks, snacks, and I am gonna try and figure out to fix my throat real quick before I start the next chapter. Alright, I did my best to get my throat cleared up. Hopefully the next time I do this, I won't have such a finicky throat for reading the book. But I hope you guys are enjoying the story so far. I hope, even though it's supposed to be a little bit of a spooky tale with, the background music and everything, but it's been one of my favorite book series for such a long time, so I'm kind of happy I got to share it with everybody. I'm gonna give it a couple more minutes to make sure everybody got whatever they need done, like drinks and snacks, and a little bathroom break, and then we'll continue the story. Have I really? Oh, I have. Huh. I guess I was getting really into it myself. I really, really do enjoy this book series. I highly recommend it for anybody who's interested in this story so far. It gets even more deeper and darker the more you get into the chapters. And the next book's set of chapter book series he makes, it gets even more intense as well. Alright, we're going to continue to chapter 4. I lived in this house as a child, said the spook, and I saw things that would make your big toes curl, but I was the only one who could, and my dad used to beat me for telling lies. Something used to climb out of the cellar. It would have been the same for you, am I right? I nodded. Well, it's nothing to worry about, lad. It's just another ghast, a fragment of a troubled soul that's gone on to better things. Without leaving the bad part of himself behind, he'd have been stuck here forever. What did he do? I asked, my voice echoing back slightly from the ceiling. The spook shook his head sadly. He was a miner whose lungs were so diseased that he couldn't work anymore. He spent his days and nights coughing and struggling for breath, and his poor wife kept them both. She worked in a bakery, but sadly for both of them, she was a very pretty woman, and some pretty women can't be trusted. To make it worse, he was a jealous man, and his illness made him bitter. One evening she was very late home from work, and he kept going to the window, pacing backward and forward, getting more and more angry because he thought she was with another man. When she finally came in, he was in such a rage that he broke her head open with a big lump of coal. Then he left her there, dying on the flags, and went down into the cellar to dig a grave. She was still alive when he came back, but she couldn't move, and he couldn't even cry out. That's the terror that comes to us, because of how she felt as he picked her up and carried her down into the darkness of the cellar. She heard him digging. She knew what he was going to do. Later that night, he killed himself. It's a sad story, but although they're at peace now, his ghast's still here, and so are her final memories, both strong enough to torment folks like us. We see things that others can't, which is both a blessing and a curse. It's a very useful thing in our trade, though. I shuddered. I felt sorry for the poor wife who'd been murdered, and I felt sorry for the miner who killed her. I even felt sorry for the spook. Imagine having to spend your childhood in a house like this. I looked down at the candle, which I'd placed in the middle of the table. It was almost burnt down, and the flame was starting its last flickering dance. But the spook didn't show any sign of wanting to go back upstairs. I didn't like the shadows on his face. It looked as if it were gradually changing, as if he were growing a snout or something. Do you know how I overcame my fear? He asked. No, sir. One night, I was so terrified that I screamed out before I could stop myself. I woke everybody up, and in a rage, my father lifted me up by the scruff of my neck and carried me down to the steps into the cellar. Then he got a hammer and then nailed the door shut behind me. It wasn't very old, probably 7 at the most. I climbed back up the steps and, screaming fit to burst, scratched and banged at the door. But my father was a hard man, and he left me all alone in the dark, and I had to stay there for hours until long after dawn. After a bit, I calmed down. And do you know what I did then? I shook my head, trying not to look at his face. His eyes were glittering very brightly, and he looked more like a wolf than ever. I walked down the steps, and I sat there in the cellar in the darkness. Then I took 3 deep breaths, and I faced my fear. I faced the darkness itself, which is the most terrifying thing of all, especially for people like us, because things come to us in the dark. They seek us out with whispers and take shapes that only our eyes can see. But I did it, and when I left the cellar, the worst was over. At that moment, the candle guttered and then went out, plunging us into an absolute darkness. This is it, lad, the spook said. There's just you, Me and the dark. Can you stand it? Are you fit to be my apprentice? His voice sounded different, sort of deeper and strange. I imagined him on all fours by now, wolf hair covering his face, his teeth growing longer. I was trembling and couldn't speak until I'd taken my third deep breath. Only then did I give him my answer. It was something my dad always said when he had to do something unpleasant or difficult. Someone has to do it, I said, so it might as well be me. The spook must have thought that was funny, because his laughter filled the whole cellar before rumbling up the steps to meet the next peal of thunder, which was on its way down. Nearly 13 years ago, said the spook, a sealed letter was sent to me. It was short to the point, and it was written in Greek. Your mother sent it. Do you know what it said? No, I said quietly, wondering what was coming next. I've just given birth to a baby boy, she wrote, and he's the 7th son of a 7th son. His name is Thomas J. Ward, and he is my gift to the county. When he's old enough, we'll send you word. Train him well. He'll be the best apprentice you've ever had, and he'll also be your last. We don't use magic, lad, the spook said, his voice hardly more than a whisper in the darkness. The main tools of our trade are common sense, courage, and keeping of accurate records, so we can learn from the past. Above all, we don't believe in prophecy. We don't believe that the future is fixed. So if what your mother wrote comes true, then it's because we make it come true. Do you understand? There was an edge of anger in his voice, but I knew it wasn't directed at me. So I just nodded into the darkness. As for being your mother's gift to the county, every single one of my apprentices were the 7th son of a 7th son. So don't you start thinking you're anything special. You've a lot of study and hard work ahead of you. Family can be a nuisance, the spook went on after a pause, his voice softer, then anger gone. I've only got 2 brothers left now. One's a locksmith, and we get on all right, but the other one hasn't spoken to me for well over 40 years, though he still lives here in Horseshaw. By the time we left the house, the storm had blown itself out, and the moon was visible. As the spook closed the front door, I noticed for the first time what had been carved in the wood. The spook nodded toward it. I use signs like this to warn others who's the skill to read them, or sometimes just to jog my own memory. You'll recognize the Greek letter gamma. It's the sign for either a ghost or a ghast. The cross on the lower right is the Roman numeral for 10, which is the lowest grading of all. Anything above a 6 is just a ghast. There's nothing in that house that can harm you. Not if you're brave. Remember, the dark feeds on fear. Be brave, and there's nothing much a ghast can do. If only I'd known that to begin with. Buck up, lad, said the spook. Your face is nearly down in your boots. Well, maybe this'll cheer you up. He pulled the lump of yellow cheese out of his pocket, broke off a small piece, and handed it to me. Chew on this, he said, but don't swallow it all at once. I followed him down the cobbled street. The air was damp, but at least it wasn't raining. And to the west, the clouds looked like lamb's wool against the sky and were starting to tear and break up into ragged strips. We left the village and continued south, right on its edge where the cobbled street became a muddy lane. There was a small church. It looked neglected. There were slates missing off the roof and paint peeling from the main door. We'd hardly seen anyone since leaving the house, but there was an old man standing in the doorway. His hair was white, and it was lank, greasy, and unkempt. His dark clothes marked him out as a priest, but as we approached him, it was the expression on his face that really drew my attention. He was scowling at us, his face all twisted up, and then dramatically he made a huge sign of the cross, actually standing on a tiptoe as he began it, stretching the forefinger of his right hand on as high into the sky as he could. I've seen priests make this sign before, but I've never with such a big, exaggerated gesture, filled with so much anger, an anger that seemed directed toward us. I suppose he'd some grievance against the spook, or maybe against the work he did. I knew the trade made most people nervous, but I've never seen a reaction like that. What was wrong with him? I asked when we had passed him and were safely out of earshot. Priests, snapped the spook, the anger sharp in his voice. They know everything but see nothing. And that one's worse than most. That's my other brother. I'd have liked to know more, but had the sense not to question him further. It seemed to me that there was a lot to learn about the spook and his past, but I had a feeling they were things he'd only tell me when he was a good and ready. So I just followed him south, carrying his heavy big bag and thinking about what my ma'am had written in the letter. She was never one to boost or make wild statements. Ma'am only said what had to be said, so she meant every single word. Usually she just got on with things and did what was necessary. The spook had told me there was nothing much could be done about gas, but Ma'am had once silenced the gas in Hangman's Hill. Being a seventh son of a seventh son was nothing that special in the line of work. You needed that just to be taken on as the spook's apprentice. But I knew there was something else that made me different. I was my ma'am's son too. And that is the end of chapter 4. And once again, we're going to take a little bit of a short break. Everybody, you do what you need to do, and I will be taking another swig of my water. I'll give everybody a couple minutes. Got myself all cleared up again. So we're going to continue on to Chapter 5, Boogarts and Witches. We were heading for what the spook called his winter house. As we walked, the last of the morning clouds melted away, and I suddenly realized that there was something different about the sun. Even in the county, the sun sometimes shines in the winter, which is good because it usually means that at least it isn't raining. But there's a time in each new year when you suddenly notice its warmth for the first time. It's just like the return of an old friend. The spook must have been thinking almost exactly the same thoughts, because he suddenly halted in his tracks, looked at me sideways, and gave me one of his rare smiles. "This is the first day of spring, lad," he said. "So we'll go to Chippenden." It seemed an odd thing to say. Did he always go to Chippenden on the first day of the spring? And if so, why? So I asked him. "Summer quarters. We winter on the edge of Anglesark Moor and spend the summer in Chippenden." "I've never heard of Anglesark. Where's that?" I asked. "To the far south of the county, lad. It's the place where I was born. We lived there until my father moved us to Horshaw. Still, at least I heard of Chippenden, so that made me feel better. It struck me that, as Spook's apprentice, I'd be doing a lot of traveling and would have to learn how to find my way about. Without further delay, we changed direction, heading northeast toward the distant hills. I didn't ask any more questions, but that night, as we sheltered in a cold barn once more, and supper was just a few more bites of the yellow cheese, my stomach began to think that my throat had been cut. I've never been so hungry. I wondered where we would be staying in Chippenden, and if we'd get something proper to eat there. I didn't know anyone who'd ever been there, but it was supposed to be a remote, unfriendly place somewhere up in the fells. The distant gray and purple hills that were just visible from my dad's farm. They always looked to me like a huge sleeping beasts, but that was probably the fault of one of my uncles, who used to tell me tales like that. At night, he said, they started to move, and by dawn, whole villages had sometimes disappeared from the face of the earth, crushed into dust beneath their weight. The next morning, dark gray clouds were covering the sun once more, and it looked as if we'd wait some time to see the second day of spring. The wind was getting up as well, tugging at our clothes as we gradually began to climb and hurling birds all over the sky, the clouds racing one another east to hide the summits of the fells. Our pace was slow, and I was grateful for that because I developed a bad blister on each heel. So it was late in the day when we approached Chippenden, the light already beginning to fail. By then, although it was still very windy, the sky had cleared and the purple fells were sharp against the skyline. The spook hadn't talked much on the journey, but now he sounded almost excited, as if he called out the names of the fells one by one. There were names such as Parlick Pike, which was the nearest to Chippenden. Others, some visible, some hidden and distant, were called Mellor Knoll, Saddle Fell, and Wolf Fell. When I asked my master if there were any wolves on Wolf Fell, he smiled grimly. "Things change rapidly here, lad," he said, "and we must always be on our guard." As the first rooftops of the village came into sight, the spook pointed to a narrow path that led away from the road to twist upward by the side of a small gurgling stream. "My house is this way," he said. "It's a slightly longer route, but it means we can avoid going through the village. I like to keep my distance from the folk who live there, They prefer it that way, too. I remembered what Jack had said about the spook, and my heart sank. He's been right. It was a lonely life. You end up working by yourself. There were a few stunted trees on each bank clinging to the hillside against the force of the wind, but then suddenly, directly ahead was a wood of sycamore and ash. As we entered, the wind died away to a distant sigh. It was just a large collection of trees, a few hundred or so maybe, that were offered shelter from the buffeting wind. But after a few moments, I realized it was more than that. I noticed before, from time to time, how some trees are noisy, always creaking their branches or rustling their leaves, while others hardly make any sound at all. Far above, I can hear the distant breath of the wind, but within the wood, the only sounds to be heard were boots. Everything was very still. A whole wood full of trees that were so silent it made a shiver run up and down my spine. It almost made me think that they were listening to us. Then we came out into a clearing, and directly ahead was a house. It was surrounded by a tall hawthorn hedge, so that just it sits on the upper story. Sorry, I had to cough again to clear myself. It was surrounded by a tall hawthorn hedge, so that just its upper story and the roof were visible. From the chimney rose a line of white smoke. Straight up into the air it went, undisturbed until, just above the trees, the wind chased it away to the east. The house and the garden, I noticed then, were sitting in a hollow in the hillside. It was just as if an obliging giant had come along and scooped away the ground with his hands. I followed the spook along the hedge until we reached a metal gate. The gate was small, no taller than my wrist, or my waist, and it had been painted a bright green, a job that had been completed so recently that I wondered if the paint had dried properly, and whether the spook would get it on his hand, which was already reaching toward the latch. Suddenly something happened that made me catch my breath. Before the spook touched the latch, it lifted up on its own, and the gate swung slowly open as if moved by an invisible hand. "Thank you," I heard the spook say. The front door didn't move by itself, because first it had to be unlocked with a large key that the spook pulled from his pocket. It looked similar to the one he'd used to unlock the door of the house in Watery Lane. "Is that the same key you used in Horshaw?" I asked. "Aye, lad," he said, glancing down at me as he pushed open the door. "My brother, the locksmith, gave me this. It opens most locks as long as they're not too complicated. Comes in quite useful in our line of work." The door yielded with a loud creak and a deep groan, and I followed the spook into a small, gloomy hallway. There was a steep staircase to the right and a narrow flagged passage on the left. "Leave everything at the foot of the stairs," said the spook. "Come on, lad, don't dawdle. There's no time to waste. I like my food piping hot." So leaving his bag and my bundle where he said, I followed him down the passage towards the kitchen and the appetizing smell of hot food. When we got there, I wasn't disappointed. It reminded me of my mam's kitchen. Herbs were growing in big pots on the wide window ledge, and the setting sun was dappling the room with leaf shadows. In the far corner, a huge fire was blazing, filling the room with warmth, and right in the middle of the flagged floor was a large oaken table. On it were two enormous empty plates, and, at its center, 5 serving dishes piled high with food next to a jug filled with a brim hot steaming gravy. "Sit down and tuck in, lad," invited the spook. I didn't need to be asked twice. I helped myself to large slices of chicken and beef, hardly leaving enough room on my plate for the mound of roasted potatoes and vegetables that followed. Finally, I topped it off with a gravy so tasty that only my ma'am could have done better. I wondered where the cook was and how she'd known we'd be arriving just at the exact time to put out all this hot food ready on the table. I was full of questions, but I was also tired, so I saved all my energy for eating. When I finally swallowed my last mouthful, the spook had already cleared his own plate. "Enjoy that?" he asked. I nodded, almost too full to speak. I felt sleepy. "After a diet of cheese, it's always good to come home to a hot meal," he said. "We eat well here. It makes up for the times when we're working." I nodded again and started to yawn. "There's lots to do tomorrow, so get yourself off to bed. Yours is the room with the green door at the top of the first flight of stairs," the spook told me. "Sleep well, but stay in your room and don't go wandering about during the night. You'll hear a bell ring when breakfast is ready. Go down as soon as you hear it. When someone's cooked good food, he may get angry if you let it go cold. But don't come down too early either, because that could just be just as bad." I nodded, thanked him for the meal, and went down the passage toward the front of the house. The spook's bag and my bundle had disappeared. Wondering who could have moved them, I climbed the stairs to bed. My new room turned out to be much larger than my bedroom at home, which at one time I had to share with 2 of my brothers. This new room had a space for a bed, a small table with a candle, a chair, and a dresser, but there was still lots of room to walk about in as well. And there on the top of the dresser, my bundle of belongings was waiting. Directly opposite the door was a large sash window divided into 8 panes of glass so thick and uneven that I couldn't see much but whorls and swirls of colors from outside. The window didn't look as if it had been open for years. The bed was pushed right up along the wall beneath it, so I pulled off my boots, kneeled up on the quilt, and tried to open the window. Although it was a bit stiff, it proved easier than it looked. I used the sash cord to raise the bottom half of the window in a series of jerks, just far enough to pop my head out and have a better look around. I could see a wide lawn below me, divided into 2 by a path of white pebbles that disappeared into the trees. Above the tree line to the right were the fells, the nearest one so close that I felt I could almost reach out and touch it. I sucked in a deep breath of cool, fresh air and smelled the grass before pulling my head back inside and unwrapping my small bundle of belongings. They fitted easily into the dresser's top drawer. As I was closing it, I suddenly noticed the writing on the far wall in the shadows opposite of the foot of the bed. It was covered in names, all scrawled in black ink on the bare plaster. Some names were larger than others, as if those who'd written them thought a lot of themselves. Many had faded with time, and I wondered if they were the names of the other apprentices who'd slept in this very room. Should I add my own name or wait until the end of the first month, when I might be taken on permanently? I didn't have a pen or ink, so it was something to think about later. But I examined the wall more closely, trying to decide which was the most recent name. I decided it was Billy Bradley. That seemed the clearest and had been squeezed into a small space as the wall filled up. For a few moments, I wondered what Billy was doing now, but I was tired and ready for sleep. The sheets were clean and the bed inviting, so wasting no more time, I undressed, and the very moment my head touched the pillow, I fell asleep. When I next opened my eyes, the sun was streaming through the window. I'd been dreaming and had been woken suddenly by a noise. I thought it was probably the breakfast bell. I felt worried then. Had it really been the bell downstairs summoning me to breakfast or the bell in my dream? How could I be sure? What was I supposed to do? It seemed that I'd been in trouble with the cook whether I went down early or late, so I decided that I probably had heard the bell. I dressed and went downstairs right away. On my way down, I heard a clatter of pots and pans coming from the kitchen, but the moment I eased open the door, everything became deathly silent. I made a mistake then. I should have gone straight back upstairs because it was obvious that the breakfast wasn't ready. The plates had been cleared away from last night's supper, but the table was still bare and the fireplace was full of cold ashes. In fact, the kitchen was chilly, and worse than that, it seemed to be growing colder by the second. My mistake was in taking a step toward the table. No sooner had I done that than I heard something make a sound right behind me. It was an angry sound. There was no doubt about it. It was a definite hiss of anger, and it was very close to my left ear. So close, I felt the breath of it. The spook had warned me not to come down early, and I suddenly felt that I was in real danger. As soon as I had entertained that thought, something hit me very hard on the back of the head. I staggered toward the door, almost losing my balance and falling headlong. I didn't need a second warning. I ran from the room and up the stairs. Then halfway up, I froze. There was someone standing at the top. Someone tall and menacing, silhouetted against the light from the door of my room. I halted, unsure which way to go until I reassured by a familiar voice. It was the spook. It was the first time I seen him without his long black cloak. He was wearing a black tunic and gray breeches, and I could see that, although he was a tall man with a broad shoulders, the rest of his body was thin. Probably because some days all he got was a nibble of cheese. He was like the very best farm laborers when they get older. Some, of course, just get fatter. But the majority, like the ones my dad sometimes hires for the harvest now that most of my brothers have left home, are thin, with tough, wiry bodies. Thinner means fitter, Dad always says. And now looking at the spook, I could see why he was able to walk at such a furious pace and for so long without resting. "I warned you about going down early," he said quietly. "No doubt you got your ears boxed. Let that be a lesson to you, lad. Next time it might be far worse." "I thought I heard the bell," I said. "But it must have been a bell in my dream." The spook laughed softly. "That's one of the first and most important lessons that an apprentice has to learn," he said. "The difference between waking and dreaming. Some never learn that." He shook his head, took a step toward me, and patted me on my shoulder. "Come, I'll show you round the garden. We got to start somewhere, and it'll pass the time until breakfast's ready." When the spook led me out, using the back door of the house, I saw that the garden was very large, much larger than it had looked from the outside of the hedge. We walked east, squinting into the early morning sun until we reached a wide lawn. The previous evening, I thought that the garden was completely surrounded by the hedge, but now I realized that I was mistaken. There were gaps in it, and directly ahead was the wood. The path of the white pebbles divided the lawn and vanished into the trees. "There's really more than one garden," said the spook. "3, in fact. Each reached by a path like this. We'll look at the eastern garden first. It's safe enough when the sun's up, but never walk down this path after dark. Well, not unless you have a very good reason, and certainly never when you're alone. Nervously, I followed the spook towards the trees. The grass was longer at the edge of the lawn, and it was dotted with bluebells. I like bluebells because they flower in the spring and always remind me that the long, hot days of summer are not too far away. But now I hardly gave them a second glance. The morning sun was hidden by the trees, and the air had suddenly gotten much cooler. It reminded me of my visit to the kitchen. There was something strange and dangerous about this part of the woods, and it seemed to be getting steadily colder the farther we advanced into the trees. There were rooks' nests high above us, and the birds' harsh, angry cries made me shiver even more than that cold. They were about as musical as my dad, who used to start singing as we got to the end of the milking. If milk ever went sour, my mam used to blame it on him. The spook halted and pointed to the ground about 5 paces ahead. "What's that?" he asked, his voice hardly more than a whisper. The grass had been cleared, and at the center of the large patch of bare earth was a gravestone. It was a vertical, but leaning slightly to left. On the ground before it, 6 feet of soil was edged with smaller stones, which was unusual. But there was something else even more strange. Across the top of the patch of earth, and fastened to the outer stones by bolts, lay 13 thick iron bars. I counted them twice just to be sure. "Well, come on, lad. I asked you a question. What is that?" My mouth was so dry I could hardly speak, but I managed to stammer out 3 words. "It's a grave." "Good lad. Got it first time. Notice anything unusual?" he asked. I couldn't speak at all by then, so I just nodded. He smiled and patted me on the shoulder. "There's nothing to be afraid of. It's just a dead witch, a pretty feeble one at that. They buried her on an unhallowed ground outside a churchyard not too many miles from here, but she kept scratching her way to the surface. I gave her a good talking to, but she wouldn't listen, so I had her brought here. It makes people feel better. That way, they can get on with their lives in peace. They don't want to think about things like this. That's our job." I nodded again and suddenly realized that I wasn't breathing, so I sucked in a deep lungful of air. My heart was hammering away in my chest, threatening to break out any minute, and I was trembling from head to foot. "No, she's little trouble now," the spook continued. "Sometimes at the full moon you can hear her stirring, but she lacks the strength to get to the surface, and the iron bars would stop her anyway. But there are worse things farther off. They're in the trees," he said, gesturing east with his bony finger. "About another 20 paces would bring you to the spot." "Worse? What could be worse?" I wondered, but I knew he was going to tell me anyway. "There are 2 other witches. One's dead and one's alive. The dead one's buried vertically, head down, but even then, once or twice each year, we have to straighten out the bars over her grave. Just keep well away after dark." "Why bury her head down?" I asked. "That's a good question, lad," the spook said. "You see, the spirit of a dead witch is usually what we call bone-bound. They're trapped inside their bones, and some don't even know that they're dead. We try them first head up, and that's enough for most. All witches are different, but some are really stubborn. Still bound to her bones, a witch like that tries hard to get back into the world. It's as if they want to be born again, so we have to make things difficult for them and bury them the other way up. Coming out feet first isn't easy. Human babies sometimes have the same trouble, but she's still dangerous, so keep well away. Make sure you keep clear of the live one. She'd be more dangerous dead than alive, because a witch that powerful would have no trouble at all getting back into the world. That's why we keep her in a pit. Her name's Mother Malkin, and she talks to herself. Well, it's more of a whisper, really. She's just about as evil as you can get. But she's been in her pit for a long time, and most of her powers bled away into the earth. She'd love to get her hands on a lad like you, so stay well away. Promise now that you won't go near. Let me hear you say it. I promise not to go near, I whispered, feeling uneasy about the whole thing. It seemed a terrible, cruel thing to keep any living creature, even a witch, in the ground. I couldn't imagine my man liking the idea much. Excuse me. That's a good lad. We don't want any more accidents like the one this morning. There are worse things than getting your ears boxed. Far worse. I believed him, but I didn't want to hear about it. Still, he had other things to show me, so I was spared more of his scary words. He led me out of the wood and strode toward another lawn. This is the southern garden, the spook said. Don't come here after dark either. The sun was quickly hidden by dense branches, and the air grew steadily cooler, so I knew we were approaching something bad. He halted about 10 paces short of a large stone that lay flat on the ground. Close to the roots of an oak tree, it covered an area a bit larger than a grave, and judging by that part, it was above the ground. The stone was very thick, too. What do you think's buried under there? The spook asked. I tried to appear confident. Another witch? No, said the spook. You don't need as much stone as that for a witch. Iron usually does the trick, but the thing under there could slip through the iron bars in the twinkling of an eye. Look closely at the stone. Can you see what's carved on it? I nodded. I recognized the letter, but I didn't know what it meant. That's the Greek letter beta, said the spook. It's a sign we use for a boogart. The diagonal lines means it's been artificially bound under the stone, and the name underneath tells you who did it. Bottom right is the Roman numeral for 1. That means it's a boogart of the first rank and very dangerous. As I mentioned, we use grades from 1 to 10. Remember that. One day it might save your life. A grade 10 is so weak that most folk wouldn't even notice it was there. A grade 1 could easily kill you. Cost me a fortune to have that stone brought here, but it was worth every penny. That's a bound boogart now. It's artificially bound, and it'll stay there until Gabriel blows his horn. There's a lot of you need to learn about boogarts, lad, and I'm going to start your training right after breakfast. But there is one important difference between those that are bound and those that are free. A free boogart can often travel miles from its home, and if it's so inclined, do endless mischief. If a boogart's particularly troublesome and won't listen to reason, then it is our job to bind it. Do it well, and it's what we call artificially bound. Then it can't move at all. Of course, it's far easier said than done. The spook frowned suddenly as if he'd remembered something unpleasant. One of my apprentices got into serious trouble trying to bind a boogart, he said, shaking his head sadly. But as it's only your first day, we won't talk about that yet. Just then, from the direction of the house, the sound of a bell could be heard in the distance. The spook smiled. Are we awake or are we dreaming? He asked. Awake. Are you sure? I nodded. In that case, let's go and eat, he said. I'll show you the other garden when our bellies are full. And that is the end of chapter 5. And I think this is a good time to end it with chapter 5. the next chapters is when it starts to get really interesting. So we'll leave it to that. Anyways, guys, this is where I'm going to end the stream. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed yourselves. I definitely enjoyed myself. I really love reading that book series, and it makes me happy getting back into the series again and sharing it with the rest of you guys. I'm pretty sure some people are probably knocked out. If so, I'm glad I was able to provide the services. But thank you guys so much for joining me for today's ASMR book reading stream. I will be sure to try and schedule another one, especially if a lot of people seem to have enjoyed it. And I'll see you guys next time. Thank you again for joining me, and thank you for all the new follows. Have a good one, guys. Have some good eat.